"Can I share this table?" asked the one-legged girl to the Mafia boss. Then he said, a single question, 5 words that would ignite a war across 3 continents and leave 17 bodies in its wake before the month ended. But in that moment, standing in the cramped bakery on Mulberry Street, neither of them knew what those 5 words would cost. The morning of October 14th, 1952, started like any other Thursday in Little Italy. Shopkeepers swept their storefronts. Delivery trucks rattled over cobblestones. The smell of fresh bread drifted through narrow streets where 3 generations of families had built their lives, their businesses, their carefully negotiated peace. But peace in this neighborhood was always temporary, always conditional, always one wrong move away from shattering completely. Before we continue, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. These stories reach every corner of the globe, and we want to know where you are as we uncover what really happened that October morning. The Bella Vista Bakery occupied a corner building that had stood since 1897. 3 stories of red brick, windows with green shutters, a hand-painted sign that Antonio Russo's grandfather had commissioned when he first opened the doors. By 1952, everyone in Little Italy knew the Bella Vista, knew its cannoli were the finest in Manhattan, knew its back room was where certain conversations happened, conversations that determined who paid what to whom, who operated where, who lived, and who disappeared into the East River wearing concrete shoes. James Cardona arrived at exactly 8:15 a.m., just as he did every Thursday morning. His black Cadillac pulled up to the curb, and 2 men emerged first, Robert Shen and Thomas Malloy, both carrying enough firepower under their suit jackets to start a small war. They scanned the street with practiced eyes, noting every face, every window, every potential threat. Only when Robert gave a slight nod did the back door open. James Cardona stepped onto the sidewalk, and the neighborhood held its breath. He was 43 years old that October, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair graying at the temples, and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a charcoal suit tailored on Savile Row during his last trip to London, a burgundy tie, shoes polished to a mirror shine. Everything about him spoke of power. The kind of power that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that simply existed, absolute and unquestioned. He'd controlled this neighborhood for 7 years, controlled it the way his father had controlled it before him and his uncle before that. The Cardona family had roots in Little Italy going back to 1903, when James's grandfather arrived from Sicily with nothing but the clothes on his back and a particular set of skills. Skills that built an empire. Skills that James had inherited along with the family business. The bakery was nearly empty when he entered. Antonio Russo himself stood behind the counter, as he did every morning, his white apron dusted with flour. He looked up when the bell above the door chimed, and his weathered face broke into a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Cardona, your usual table is ready." James nodded once, moved through the bakery toward the back room where Thursday morning meetings happened, where territory was divided, where disputes were settled, where the real business of Little Italy was conducted over espresso and sfogliatelle. He never made it to that back room, because that's when she walked in. The bell chimed again. James was 3 steps from the back room door when something made him pause, some instinct honed by years of survival in a world where hesitation meant death. He turned. She stood just inside the entrance, one hand gripping a crutch, the other holding the door frame for balance. Early 20s, maybe 24 at most. Auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Gray eyes that swept the bakery with the kind of careful assessment James recognized. the assessment of someone who'd learned to catalog exits and threats before anything else. But what stopped him completely was her left leg, or rather the absence of it. Her left pant leg was pinned up just below the knee, and the single crutch supported her weight as she stood there, taking in the scene. She wore a faded blue coat that had seen better seasons. Her shoe, was scuffed but clean. Everything about her spoke of someone trying to maintain dignity while the world pushed back. James had seen that look before, had seen it on his own mother's face during the lean years after his father's death, before James took over and rebuilt everything his father's enemies had tried to destroy. The bakery held 7 other customers that morning, an elderly couple at a corner table sharing a pot of tea, 2 construction workers at the counter grabbing breakfast before their shift, 3 young men near the window, members of the Vitelli crew, eating pastries while they waited for their own boss to arrive for a scheduled sit-down. Every single one of them looked at the girl with the crutch, then looked away, because that's what you did in Little Italy. You minded your business. You saw nothing. You remembered less. But James kept watching as she made her way to the counter. Her movement was practiced, efficient. She'd been using that crutch long enough that it had become an extension of herself. No awkwardness, no self-consciousness, just determination. "Coffee, please," she said to Antonio. Her voice was steady, polite. "Black, no sugar." "50 cents, Antonio replied, already reaching for a cup.
She fumbled with a small coin purse, and James saw her hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, from cold maybe, or hunger, or exhaustion. She counted out exact change, placing it carefully on the counter. The bakery had 11 tables. All of them were occupied except for one, a small 2-person table near the window where James sometimes sat when he wanted to watch the street. Robert and Thomas had claimed it 20 minutes earlier, taking their usual positions where they could monitor both the entrance and the back room door. The girl took her coffee and turned, scanning for a place to sit. Her eyes moved across the occupied tables, lingering for a moment on the empty chairs where people had placed bags or coats or newspapers. Universal signals. Taken. Occupied. Not available. She approached the elderly couple first. James couldn't hear what she said, but he saw the woman's expression harden, saw the man shake his head firmly. The girl nodded, apologized, moved on. She tried the construction workers next. One of them laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively, gestured around the crowded bakery as if to say, "What do you expect us to do about it?" The 3 Vitelli men didn't even let her finish her question before turning away. One of them muttered something that made his companions snicker. The girl's shoulders tensed, but she said nothing, just moved on, which left only one table with available seating. James watched her approach Robert and Thomas, watched her take a breath, straightening her spine in a way that suggested this was costing her something. Pride, maybe, or the last reserves of whatever strength had gotten her through the door in the first place. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet bakery. "I'm so sorry to bother you, but would you mind if I shared this table? Everything else is full, and I just need somewhere to sit for a few minutes. I promise I won't be in your way." Robert's expression didn't change. He was 41, built like a brick wall, with a scar running from his left ear to his collar. He'd gotten that scar in Korea, and he'd given worse to the people who'd given it to him. His eyes were flat, assessing. Tables taken. "I can see you're waiting for someone," the girl continued, and James heard something in her voice now. Desperation creeping in around the edges of that careful politeness. "I'm not asking to take the whole table, just one chair. I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here." "Tables taken," Thomas repeated. He was younger than Robert, 35, with a kind of face that looked friendly until you saw what was behind the smile. Plenty of other places in the neighborhood to get coffee. The girl's hand tightened on her crutch. "Please? I've been walking for an hour. I just need 10 minutes to rest." "Not our problem," Robert said flatly. And that's when James Cardona made a decision that would change everything. "Robert," his voice cut through the bakery like a knife. Every conversation stopped, every head turned, because when James Cardona spoke, you listened. "Give her the chair." Robert's eyes widened fractionally, the only sign of his surprise. "Boss, we were holding this table for—" "I know what you were holding it for. The meeting can wait 5 minutes. Give her the chair." Thomas started to stand, but James waved him back down. "Not yours, the empty one." He looked at the girl directly for the first time. Up close, he could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the dark circles under those gray eyes, the way she was putting most of her weight on the crutch because even standing still was taking effort. "Sit," he said. Not unkindly, but not a request either. She hesitated. Her eyes moved from James to Robert to Thomas, and he saw her doing calculations, weighing risks, trying to determine what this would cost her. Smart girl. "Thank you," she finally said, moving carefully to the chair. She propped her crutch against the wall and lowered herself into the seat with visible relief, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth directly into her bones. James pulled out the other chair and sat down across from her. Behind him, he heard Antonio make a small sound of surprise, heard the elderly couple whisper urgently to each other, felt the attention of everyone in the bakery shift, recalibrate, try to understand what was happening. Because James Cardona didn't sit with strangers, didn't make small talk with civilians, didn't waste time on people who couldn't do something for him. "What's your name?" he asked. She met his eyes, and he saw calculation there too. Saw her weighing how much truth to give him. "Sarah," she said finally. "Sarah Mitchell." "Where are you from, Sarah Mitchell?" "Brooklyn, originally." Took a sip of coffee and he noticed her hands had stopped shaking. "I've been staying in the Bronx for the last few months." "Long walk from the Bronx to Little Italy." "Took the subway most of the way, walked the last bit." "Why?" "Why what?" "Why come all the way down here? Brooklyn's got coffee shops, Bronx too." She was quiet for a moment, staring down into her cup. When she looked up, I saw something shift in her expression. A decision being made. "I'm looking for someone." "Who?" "A man named Vincent Russo. I was told he comes here on Thursday mornings." The bakery got quieter, if that was even possible. I felt Robert and Thomas tense behind me, saw Antonio's face go pale behind the counter, because Vincent Russo was Antonio's younger brother, and Vincent Russo had been missing for 3 weeks. And Vincent Russo had been in possession of $75,000 that belonged to the Martelli family when he disappeared. And the Martelli family wanted answers, wanted their money, wanted Vincent's head on a plate. And here was this girl, with one leg and a crutch and exhaustion in her eyes, asking about him in the one place in Little Italy where his name was poison. James leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What do you want with Vincent Russo?" "He owes me something." "Money?" "Information." "What kind of information?" Sarah Mitchell took another sip of coffee, set the cup down carefully, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, certain, the voice of someone who'd come too far to turn back now. "He knows what happened to my brother. He was there the night Daniel died, and I need to know if it was an accident like the police said, or if someone made it look like one." James felt the pieces starting to click into place. Daniel Mitchell. He'd heard the name, heard the story. Dock worker in Red Hook, found dead at the bottom of a pier 3 months ago, skull fractured, officially ruled accidental. Fell and hit his head, they said. Probably drunk, they said. Case closed. But there were rumors, whispers that Daniel Mitchell had seen something he shouldn't have, had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, had paid the price for knowing too much. And Vincent Russo had been working the docks that summer. "Vincent Russo isn't here," James said, carefully.
"Do you know where he is?" "No." "Do you know if he's alive?" James considered his answer. considered what this girl was really asking, considered what she'd already figured out just by walking through that door. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I can tell you that a lot of people are looking for him, and the people looking hardest aren't the type who ask polite questions." "I'm not asking politely either," Sarah said, and there was steel in her voice now. "My brother was 26 years old. He had a wife. He had a daughter who will never remember him, and he died for a reason, not an accident. I know he did, and Vincent Russo is the only person who can tell me why." James stared at her. At this girl with one leg who'd walked across the city looking for a man who was probably dead, looking for answers in a neighborhood where questions got you killed. Sitting across from him without fear, without hesitation, asking him for something he couldn't give. Stupid. Brave. Dangerous. Or maybe just desperate enough that the difference didn't matter anymore. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You should finish your coffee, go back to the Bronx, and forget about Vincent Russo. Forget about your brother. Because the people who can answer your questions won't just tell you what happened, they'll make sure you can't ask anyone else." "I'm already forgotten," Sarah said. "The police closed the case, my sister-in-law moved away, everyone told me to let it go, move on, stop making trouble. But Daniel was my brother. He raised me after our parents died. He was the only family I had, and someone took him from me. So no, I'm not going to finish my coffee and forget. I'm going to find out what happened, with or without Vincent Russo." The bell above the door chimed again. James didn't need to look to know who'd arrived. He could tell by the way Robert and Thomas both stood up simultaneously, by the way the temperature in the bakery seemed to drop 10 degrees. Michael Martelli had entered the building, and the meeting James had been waiting for was about to begin. But now there was a girl at his table asking questions about Vincent Russo. Questions that Michael Martelli very much didn't want answered. Questions that connected dots Michael had spent 3 months making sure stayed disconnected. James Cardona looked at Sarah Mitchell and saw the future splitting into 2 paths. On one path, he stood up, walked away, let her drink her coffee and leave. Let whatever happened next happen without his involvement, stayed neutral, stayed safe. On the other path, he kept sitting, kept listening, got involved in something that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with the kind of trouble that started wars. 5 words brought her here. "Can I share this table?" And James Cardona's answer to that question was about to determine whether this girl lived to see tomorrow. Michael Martelli was 51 years old, but he looked older. The kind of older that comes from carrying weight that has nothing to do with years. His hair was steel gray, combed straight back from a face that had forgotten how to smile genuinely sometime in the 1940s. He wore a navy suit that cost more than most people made in a month, and his shoes clicked against the bakery floor with the rhythm of a man who'd never hurried for anyone in his entire life. 3 men flanked him. I recognized all of them. David Caruso, on the left, 47 with hands that had broken more bones than most doctors had set. Paul Henderson, on the right, 39 who handled collections for the Martelli territory and had a reputation for making examples out of people who paid late. And behind them, younger, maybe 30, was Alex Romano. Fresh blood, ambitious. The kind of ambition that got people killed, including sometimes the ambitious person himself. Michael's eyes swept the bakery, cataloged every face, every detail, before settling on James. Then his eyes shifted fractionally to the left, to the girl sitting at James' table. The girl who'd just spoken Vincent Russo's name out loud in a room where that name was a death sentence. James saw Michael's expression change, saw recognition flicker across his features. Not recognition of Sarah Mitchell specifically, recognition of a problem, a complication, something that needed to be handled. "James,"
Michael's voice carried the particular warmth of a handshake between business partners who both knew they'd stab each other in the back if the numbers made sense. James stood up slowly, deliberately, positioned himself between Michael and Sarah. Just being neighborly. Girl needed a place to sit. Coffee's better when you're not drinking it on the street. Neighborly. Michael repeated the word like he was tasting something unfamiliar. His eyes never left Sarah. That's always been your best quality, James. That generous spirit. Your father had it too. Generous right up until someone took advantage. Then he stopped being generous and started being something entirely else. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Antonio had disappeared into the back. The elderly couple were gathering their things with trembling hands, desperate to leave but terrified to draw attention by moving too quickly. The construction workers had abandoned their breakfast, already halfway to the door.
Only the 3 Vitelli men remained, and James knew why. They were waiting to see which way this broke, waiting to see if this was the day the carefully maintained peace between the Cardona and Martelli families finally shattered, waiting to take that information back to their boss so Frank Vitelli could decide whose side to be on when the shooting started. "Michael," James kept his voice level, casual. "We have business to discuss. The back room is ready. Antonio laid out the good pastries, the ones he doesn't sell to tourists." "We do have business." Michael's gaze finally shifted back to James. "Important business about money that's gone missing. Money and the man who took it. You know anything about that, James? I know you've been looking for Vincent Russo for 3 weeks. I know you've torn apart half of Red Hook searching. I know you've asked questions of everyone who ever spoke to the man. And I know you're no closer to finding him today than you were in September. That's what I love about you, James, always so well informed." Michael took a step closer. His men moved with him, a choreographed dance they'd performed 1,000 times. "But here's something you might not know. Vincent Russo had help, had to have help. $75,000 doesn't just disappear. Someone helped him move it. Someone helped him hide it. Someone helped him run. And you think I know who. I think you know everything that happens in this neighborhood, just like your father did, just like your uncle before him. The Cardona family has eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. So yeah, James, I think if anyone knows where Vincent Russo is, it's you." Sarah's coffee cup clinked against the table as she set it down. The sound was sharp in the tense silence. Michael's attention snapped to her, like a predator noticing movement. "Who are you?" he asked her directly. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. James had to give her credit. Most people withered under Michael Martelli's stare. Most people saw the violence lurking behind those cold eyes and remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. But Sarah just sat there, one hand resting on the table, the other in her lap, looking at Michael like he was just another person asking questions she'd already decided not to answer. "Nobody," she said quietly. "Just someone having coffee." Nobody doesn't ask about Vincent Russo in Antonio Russo's bakery on a Thursday morning when James Cardona happens to be here. Michael walked around James, closing the distance to the table. Nobody doesn't travel all the way from the Bronx looking for information about a man who stole from me. So I'll ask you again, and I'll ask nicer than I usually do. Who are you? Her name is Sarah Mitchell. Her brother was Daniel Mitchell, dock worker, died 3 months ago in Red Hook. She thinks Vincent Russo knows something about it. Daniel Mitchell, the one who fell off the pier. That's what the police said. That's what happened. Maybe, James moved slightly, putting himself back between Michael and Sarah. Maybe not. But what does it matter? Daniel Mitchell's dead. Vincent Russo's missing. This girl's looking for answers she's not gonna find. She'll drink her coffee, leave, and that'll be the end of it. Will it? Michael's voice dropped lower, more dangerous.
because from where I'm standing, it looks like loose ends, and you know how I feel about loose ends, James. They have a way of unraveling everything if you don't tie them off properly. Robert and Thomas had moved from their positions by the window. Subtle shifts, but James registered them. They were flanking him now, ready to move if Michael's men made a play. The mathematics of violence were adding up. 6 men total, not counting James and Sarah. 3 Vitelli soldiers watching from the corner, wild cards who could tip the balance either way. And in the middle of it all, a girl with one leg who asked the wrong question in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. "Michael," James said carefully, his voice cut through the tension. "We have business to discuss. The back room is ready. Antonio laid out the good pastries, the ones he doesn't sell to tourists. We do have business." Michael's gaze finally shifted back to James. "Important business about money that's gone missing. Money and the man who took it. You know anything about that, James? I know you've been looking for Vincent Russo for 3 weeks. I know you've torn apart half of Red Hook searching. I know you've asked questions of everyone who ever spoke to the man. And I know you're no closer to finding him today than you were in September. That's what I love about you, James, always so well informed." Michael took a step closer. His men moved with him, a choreographed dance they'd performed 1,000 times. "But here's something you might not know. Vincent Russo had help. Had to have help. $75,000 doesn't just disappear. Someone helped him move it. Someone helped him hide it. Someone helped him run. And you think I know who. I think you know everything that happens in this neighborhood, just like your father did, just like your uncle before him. The Cardona family has eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. So yeah, James, I think if anyone knows where Vincent Russo is, it's you. $24,000 doesn't just disappear. Someone helped him move it. Someone helped him hide it. Someone helped him run. Someone like you. You knew this. You're not going to deny it, are you?" James didn't answer immediately. He could feel the urge to defend himself, to rail against the accusation, to deny it with every fiber of his being. He could see the anger in Michael's eyes, the knowledge that he had him dead to rights. Sometimes the best response was no response at all. Sometimes silence was more powerful than any words. "He knew?" Michael asked, his voice filled with satisfaction. "He knew and said nothing?" James remained silent, his eyes locked on Michael, unwilling to dignify the accusation with a response. "Basta," Michael finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "He knew and didn't tell me. He knew I was looking for him and didn't say a word." The silence in the bakery was eerie in the face of Michael's anger. James knew he needed to say something to diffuse the tension, to prove his innocence, to protect himself from the accusations that were flying thick and fast. But he also knew that any words would only serve to inflame the situation further. "Michael," James finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "You came here for a meeting. Let's have that meeting, in the back room like we planned, and this girl will finish her coffee and leave, and none of this matters." "Everything matters," Michael said, but his hand came up, stopping his men from advancing. "Every loose thread, every unanswered question, every person who knows too much, it all matters, James. Your father understood that. That's why he lived as long as he did. That's why he died with respect instead of a bullet in an alley."
The mention of James's father was deliberate, calculated, a reminder that even the powerful died when they made the wrong choices, when they protected the wrong people, when they let sentiment override strategy. "My father also understood when to fight and when to walk away," James said. "He understood that some battles cost more than they're worth. He understood that killing civilians brings heat none of us need. That's wisdom, Michael. That's survival."
Or maybe, Michael countered, it's weakness. Maybe that's why the Cardona territory keeps shrinking while mine keeps growing. Because I understand something your father never did. You can't show mercy and expect people to respect you. You can't let questions go unanswered and expect people to stop asking. James felt the moment crystallizing, hardening into something irreversible. Felt the choice being forced on him. Stand aside and let Michael Martelli do what men like Michael Martelli did to problems like Sarah Mitchell. Or step in, make her his responsibility, his problem, his war. 5 words. Can I share this table? That's all it had taken to put him here. Sarah, James said without turning around, it's time for you to leave. I'm not done with my coffee. Yes, you are. Robert's going to walk you outside. He's going to make sure you get back to the subway station safely, and you're going to go home and forget you ever came here. Forget Vincent Russo. Forget your brother's death. Forget all of it. I can't do that. You don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. James finally turned to look at her. Sarah Mitchell was standing now, balancing on her crutch, and there was something in her eyes that he recognized, the same thing he'd seen in the mirror 20 years ago when his father died and men came to tell him he was too young, too inexperienced, too weak to hold the family together. The same stubborn refusal to accept what everyone else said was inevitable. If you stay, he said quietly, you die. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And it won't be quick. It won't be clean. Michael's people will make sure you suffer first. Make sure you regret ever asking questions. Make sure everyone who hears about it knows what happens when civilians stick their noses where they don't belong. Is that what you want? Is your brother's death worth dying slowly for? Sarah's eyes were wet, but no tears fell. He was all I had. He was my family. Someone took him from me and they got away with it. They got away with it because people like you let them. Because it's easier to look away. Because one dead dock worker doesn't matter in your world. Well, he mattered in mine. He was my whole world. So yes, it's worth dying for. At least I'll die knowing I didn't just accept the lie. For a moment, James saw his sister, saw Maria, dead 15 years now, buried in Calvary Cemetery next to his father. Maria, who'd asked too many questions about their father's business, who'd wanted to know exactly how the family made its money, who'd threatened to go to the federal prosecutors with everything she knew unless their father went legitimate. 3 weeks later, Maria drove her car off a bridge. Official ruling, suicide. Depression, the doctor said. Couldn't cope with their father's death, they said. But James knew, had always known. Some of his father's partners hadn't wanted to risk what Maria might say, hadn't wanted to take that chance. And his father, bound by rules older than any of them, had looked away, had let it happen, had chosen the family business over his own daughter. James had never forgiven him for that, never forgiven himself for not stopping it, for being too young, too powerless, too afraid to stand between Maria and the consequences of her questions. And now here was another girl asking questions, another girl who didn't understand that the truth had a price in this world, another girl about to learn that sometimes the only reward for courage was an early grave. Michael, James said, making a decision that he knew would change everything. She's under my protection now. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Michael Martelli's face went completely still, the kind of still that preceded explosions. Behind him, David Caruso's hand disappeared inside his jacket. Paul Henderson took a step forward. Alex Romano's eyes darted between James and Michael, calculating, measuring, waiting for the signal that would turn the bakery into a slaughterhouse. "Say that again," Michael said quietly. "I want to make sure I heard you correctly." "She's under my protection," James repeated, each word deliberate, final. "She walks out of here untouched. She goes home. Nobody follows her. Nobody threatens her. Nobody makes her disappear. That's how this ends." That's how this ends? Michael's voice rose now, the carefully maintained control cracking. You're declaring protection over some crippled girl you met 10 minutes ago? Over a civilian who's asking questions about my business, about my money? You're willing to burn everything between our families for her? I'm willing to prevent unnecessary bloodshed. That's what my father would have done. That's what keeps this neighborhood from turning into a war zone. Your father would have handed her over, Michael shot back. Your father understood priorities, understood that one girl's life doesn't matter when balanced against stability, against order, against the way things work. James felt Robert and Thomas closing ranks behind him, felt the Vitelli soldiers shifting in the corner, hands moving towards weapons, felt Sarah standing motionless at his back, understanding that her fate was being decided in words exchanged between men who dealt in violence the way bankers dealt in numbers. Michael, James said, my father also understood that killing civilians brings federal attention, that dead bodies on the street mean investigations, that investigations mean everyone loses. So here's what's going to happen, Michael. Sarah leaves, you and I go to the back room and discuss our actual business. The $75,000 Vincent Russo took, we'll find a way to make you whole. But this girl, she's done, she's out, and nobody touches her. And if I say no, then we have a different conversation, one that involves all 6 of our men, plus the 3 Vitelli soldiers who'll have to choose sides, plus Antonio's family upstairs who'll call the police, one that ends with bodies and sirens and federal agents asking questions nobody wants to answer. Is that what you want? Is one girl worth that? The mathematics of violence hung in the air. Everyone in the room was running the same calculations. Who would shoot first? Who would die first? Who would survive? Whether any of them would walk out of the Bella Vista bakery alive. Michael Martelli stared at James for what felt like an eternity. Then his eyes shifted to Sarah. You know what happened to your brother? Sarah's voice was steady. No.
Good. Keep it that way. Because James Cardona just bought your life with a promise he'd better keep. You walk out of here, you forget Vincent Russo's name. You forget this bakery. You forget Little Italy exists. And if I ever hear that you're asking questions again, if I ever hear your name connected to my business again, James's protection won't mean anything. You understand? I understand. Say it clearly. I understand. I'll stop asking questions. Michael turned back to James. You're making a mistake. You're letting sentiment override business sense, just like your sister did. We all know how that ended. The mention of Maria was intentional, cruel, a reminder of the cost of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. James felt rage rising in his chest, hot and dangerous, but he forced it down, forced himself to stay calm, because losing control now meant losing everything. The back room, James said coldly. 5 minutes. We'll discuss terms. Michael nodded slowly. We'll discuss terms and consequences, because this isn't over, James. You just changed the balance, changed the rules. And rules, once broken, don't go back together easily. He gestured to his men. Let's go. They filed toward the back room. David Caruso shot one last look at Sarah, memorizing her face. Paul Henderson's expression promised future violence. Alex Romano smiled slightly, like he'd just watched someone sign their own death warrant. When the door closed behind them, the bakery exhaled collectively. The Vitelli men left quickly, eager to report what they'd witnessed. Antonio emerged from the back, his face pale. The morning had started like every other Thursday. It was ending with fault lines cracking through the neighborhood's carefully maintained peace. James turned to Sarah. Robert's going to take you home now, all the way to your door, and then you're going to do exactly what you said. Stop asking questions. Stop looking for Vincent Russo. Stop trying to find out what happened to your brother. Why did you do that? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you risk everything for a stranger? James thought about Maria, about his sister's questions, about how nobody had stood between her and the consequences, about living with that weight for 15 years. Because someone should have protected my sister when she asked the wrong questions, he said quietly. Nobody did. She died because of it. Maybe I can't change what happened to her, but I can change what happens to you. What really happened to my brother? I don't know, but I'll find out. Not for you, for me. Because if it connects to Vincent Russo, it connects to Michael Martelli. And if Michael's people killed a dock worker and covered it up, that's something I need to know about. That's something that changes the board. Sarah reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. A young man in dock worker's clothes, smiling at the camera, holding a little girl on his shoulders. That's Daniel. That's his daughter, Emma. She's 4 now. She asks about her daddy every single day. When you find out what happened, when you learn the truth, promise me you'll tell her someday, when she's old enough to understand. Promise me she'll know her father didn't just fall off a pier drunk, that he mattered. James took the photograph, studied Daniel Mitchell's face. Ordinary, working class. A man who'd probably never imagined his death would cause ripples that reached into bakeries where mafia bosses made deals. I promise. Robert escorted Sarah out. James watched through the window as they walked toward the subway station, his bulk making her look even smaller, more fragile. She'd come to Little Italy looking for answers. She was leaving with her life. In this world, that counted as winning. Antonio approached cautiously. Mr. Cardona, what you did, standing up to Michael like that, it's gonna cost you. I know. Was she worth it? James looked down at the photograph in his hand, at Daniel Mitchell's smile, at little Emma's joy, at a moment of happiness frozen in time before tragedy struck. My father used to say that the measure of a man isn't how much power he holds, it's what he does with that power when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain and everything to lose. He tucked the photograph into his jacket pocket. Today, I measured myself, and I'm going to find out if I'm the man my father wanted me to be, or the man he became. He walked toward the back room where Michael Martelli waited, where new terms would be negotiated, where the consequences of 5 words, "Can I share this table?" would reshape the balance of power in Little Italy. Behind him, Antonio whispered a prayer for James, for Sarah, for all of them caught in the machinery of violence that ground on regardless of who got crushed beneath its wheels. The door closed, the meeting began, and somewhere in the Bronx, Sarah Mitchell would arrive home alive, carrying the weight of a promise made by a man who just gambled everything on the possibility that some questions were worth answering, even when the answers could destroy you. Some battles you chose, some chose you, and some, like that Thursday morning in October, started with nothing more than a desperate girl asking if she could share a table with a stranger who'd become the only thing standing between her and death.